Praise be to our Lord Jesus Christ, both now and forever. There is this connection because, our people, just like the people of old, human beings that have remained the same, we like fealty. We like freebies, free food, free drink, free so many things. So the first reading, the beginning of the first reading must have been very interesting to people that like to get things without working for them. So he says, "Come to me, all who are thirsty, though you have no money, come. Buy corn without money, and eat at no cost, wine and drink." Very interesting. And but we must realize that the import of the message, this is coming from Deutero-Isaiah. Deutero-Isaiah is second Isaiah from chapter 45 to chapter 55. Very deep poetic language, deeply poetic. So we cannot take it at face value. There is a talk about food, but like Prof rightly pointed out, it was not really about food. It was not really about the food that we have to eat and drink, the wine and all these things. Even especially if you go down a little more down the line, he talked about what he actually meant. The other one perhaps was to catch attention. And then the deeper meaning of what he said came out. Listen to me, and you will have good things to eat. Listen to me, and you have good things to eat, and rich food to enjoy. Pay attention, come to me. Now, the details of it, that's to show that this is not really about eating, drinking in the physical sense of the word, but in a higher sense of the word, in a deeper spiritual sense of the word. The gospel brought about the miracle of the breaking of bread and then sharing to a multiplication of loaves, of which he correctly linked it to John 6. In John 6, the theology of the Eucharist was given, and the prelude for that theology of the Eucharist was feeding of a large number of people. This person was writing, this other person was writing. We do not know clearly whether they referred to the same event or to a different event. But the fact is that there was a feeding. And the import of that feeding led to a deep theology. And I think I would like us this morning to go in the direction of that freebie, but the freebie that is available to us in the church. It's not really the freebie of food. It is the freebie called gracia. So today, I will really like us to look a little more deeply into the Catholic teaching on grace. Maybe we will start with the Igbo definition, the classical Igbo definition in the catechism which we all learned. Or say, gịnị bụ gracia? Anyị za wee sị na gracia bụ gracia bụ onyinye mmụọ Chukwu ji eme ọgọ. Ọ na-enye anya na nkịtị maka odudu asa anyị na nzọpụta anyị. I think we just forgot, but I think we know it very well. So, gracia bụ onyinye mmụọ Chukwu ji eme ọgọ. A supernatural gift of God. So it's a freebie. Freebie means that it is given, a grant. Now, ọ na-enye anya na nkịtị, an emphasis on the descriptive emphasis on the fact that no bụ onyinye mmụọ. Ọ na-enye anyị na nkịtị. But what is more critical to note in that catechism is the purpose of the gracia. Ọsị na ọ na-enye anya maka odudo asọ anyị na nzọpụta anyị. That is now, it is for our sanctification and justification. Justification goes with salvation. So the purpose of grace in our life is to sanctify us and then to justify us. The same catechism goes ahead, and in fact the entire theology of the church goes ahead to say that there are two forms of grace. Gracia nnọnyelu na gracia inyaka. Maka na catechism goes on as ụdị gracia oned, as not ụdị gracia na bụ gracia nnọnyelu na gracia inyaka. Gracia nnọnyelu bụkwa ka a na-akpọ gracia na-edo asọ. That is, in English, it is called sanctifying grace. So there are two forms of grace in the theology of the Catholic Church. In fact, in the theology of Christianity, everybody understands that there is grace. Even though the Pentecostal or Protestant interpretation or understanding of grace is substantially different from Catholic understanding of grace. But everybody believes, every Christian believes in the power of grace and in the availability of grace. Now, we take the Catholic version. The Catholic version talks about sanctifying grace. The sanctifying grace is that grace that is resident on the individual, given by God completely ex gratia. No one can merit, there's nothing you can do on your own to get sanctifying grace. Nothing you can do. The sanctifying grace is only given by God. And truly it is free. Now, how do we get that sanctifying grace? We get sanctifying grace at the point of baptism. Any person who becomes baptized gains the sanctifying grace. O wee sị anyị na catechism na baptism na-akanye akara animama na mkpụrụ obi nke na-ada ekwe ihichapụ. Onye catechism gwara anyị na baptism na-akanye akara animama na mkpụrụ obi nke na-anaghị ekwe ihichapụ. So, by the fact of baptism, each and every one of us is conferred with a sanctifying grace. Now, this sanctifying grace can, as it were, be deactivated. Because, quite all right, we become configured to Christ, we become candidates of heaven. At each point that they are doing baptism, remember there are symbolisms. There is a symbolism of light, a candle. There is also a symbolism of white, whereby both the parents of the child and the godfather or godmother are urged to ensure that the light does not go off, that the white does not become discolored. These refer symbolically to the guiding of that sanctifying grace within us. In the teaching of the church, assured teaching of the church, the only thing that destroys the sanctifying grace, well, not destroying, let me not call it destroying. The only thing that deactivates the sanctifying grace within us is mortal sin. If you listen carefully to him, when he was talking a bit about that Eucharist, he talked about the need to receive the Holy Eucharist only when you are in a state of grace. The Catholics emphasize this being in state of grace. It is the state whereby the sanctifying grace within the individual is in active mode, not deactivated, not inactive. Ọ kụziri anyị wee sị anyị na ihe bụ nje ugbu na ọ na-egbu mkpụrụ obi na-ebutelu mmadụ ịdabanye n'ọkụ mmụọ. Ya bụ ihe bụ nje ogbu, ihe eji akpọ ya nje ogbu, katikizim na-ekwu na ọ na-egbu mkpụrụ obi na-ebutelu mmadụ ịdabanye n'ọkụ mmụọ. And that is the Catholic teaching, and that is where also the Catholic teaching differs substantially from the Pentecostal or Protestant teaching on grace. Calvin emphasized grace, Luther emphasized grace. But essentially, their emphasis on grace focused something like a legal declaration by God that this person is justified. And that this legal declaration does not substantially affect the state of the individual's soul. But the Catholics teach, look, it affects substantially the state of the individual's soul. And which is why mortal sin has the capacity to deactivate this state. And the unfortunate truth, which at times we want to shy away from, is that this being in state of grace is foundational to further actions of grace. That is now, so to say, if we do an act when we are not in state of grace, we will understand it a little more. For example, if we go to the second state, after the sanctifying grace is what is called the actual grace. That is gracia nke inyaka. Gracia nke inyaka, binyaka nke mmụọ, nke mkpụrụ obi na-enwete. So we are all beneficiaries of that grace, the actual grace, the grace that is supernatural intervention. You know, those who are grace-filled, that is the way God intervenes in their lives. Those who are grace-filled, at the point of execution, maybe somebody comes in and scatters the whole thing. It can be an intervention of grace. The grace that is following you. So, and you see, it is the theology of that actual grace, grace and kinyaka, with the basis of those short prayers that used to abound in Catholic Church. Just a moment, there are plenty of them. And the whole idea of it is at that moment of spiritual danger, to be able to invoke a grace, a type of grace that actually helps to fleshing the sanctifying grace. The actual grace helps to fleshing, as it were. Forget the word that I'm using, perhaps they are not so correct, but that's just a way of describing it. The sanctifying grace might be a minimum requirement for going to heaven. But then the actual graces, they add to the sanctifying grace, building it up. Now, the Catholic Church teaches us also that there are ways, definite ways through which we can gain actual grace. We gain graces. We gain graces by doing corporal works of mercy. We gain graces by doing spiritual work of mercy. We gain graces in a number of ways. Someone may choose to make a sacrifice and offer up the sacrifice. Somebody may decide, maybe it's something that even came to you naturally. A trouble came. Instead of rejecting the trouble, you know, in the modern theology, I mean, not modern theology, it's not Catholic. In some Pentecostal theology, the whole thing is, I reject it. I send it back to the center. It's not my portion. In the original Catholic theology, people accept suffering. And the acceptance of the suffering, you know, it is not just accepting a passive acceptance of suffering. It is active acceptance of suffering. And a directed act, so that suffering that came will become an opportunity for grace. These are actual graces. And you see people gathering graces. You hear of people gathering graces. The grace you gather is the actual grace. When Prof was talking, he talked something about God requiring us to do a little. I think I had him right. Based on the gospel. Jesus, he said, and we all know, that if Jesus desired, he could have invoked food and the people would have been fed. Now the question is, why did he start looking for something? Something insignificant. When you compare 5 loaves to the actual quantity of people who were fed, you will agree with me that quantity of loaves that these people brought were so small in comparison. That is the way the action of grace goes. What you are expected to bring in is infinitesimally small compared to what you gain. You remember that actual graces, that's sanctifying grace, is deactivated by sin, mortal sin. But it is reactivated by a good confession. Now, you go to confession, you've committed a very serious offense, and you needed to pay for that offense. But you go, by the grace of God, freely made available. Maybe you say what you have done, then you are told to say, Our Father 10 times, or chaplet once, or even if you are told to do fasting, come to think of it. If you consider the gravity of the sin you committed, and if you consider what you lost by that act of sin, because clearly what the church teaches is that by act of mortal sin, you lose the right to go to heaven. And then you get back this right simply by going for a good confession. So it is something gracious, it is something big. A little thing is demanded from us, then a big thing comes to us. That's the action of grace. If we disregard the action of grace, we lose a lot. What we lose by disregarding the action of grace is so much. And one error that I was trying to point out, which I said, let me point it out that I have thought about actual grace. Some people will think that actual grace can replace sanctifying grace. Some people think that doing great things for the church can replace the need to have the sanctifying grace as prescribed by Jesus Christ himself. It will not. If the sanctifying grace is deactivated, the Catholic Church teaches us that the only avenue that can reactivate it is through the sacrament of penance, sacrament of reconciliation. We know there is something like perfect contrition. But how do you now define and measure the perfection of the contrition if you are the one that is designing it? So the safe means, as a matter of fact, is for us to ensure that when we find ourselves in state of mortal sin, as quickly as we can, we'll seek for access to the confessional. And then we are assured that, look, this process is completed. It is like someone who is supposed to receive promotion, and you are expected to write all your papers, the papers you have published. Maybe you have a very high impact factor paper, but you fail to put it in the SAS, what do they call it? ASAS, sorry, whatever, ASAS sheet. If you fail to put it in the ASAS sheet, everybody will forget it for you. Nobody will remind you, unless you have a very good friend who will remind you. How about, you didn't put this paper? You didn't, but if you did not put that paper there and the thing begins to move, it has moved. The paper is not there, means the paper is not there. But the simple act was just put the paper there, and it will create the required impact. So, my dear friends, we owe ourselves a duty not to overlook the grace of God made abundantly available to us. Let us not lose opportunities for grace by doing good. Remember that in Catholic theology, the emphasis is not on fighting the devil. It is not like the Catholic Church does not know that the devil exists. The devil exists, and the devil is quite powerful. But the Catholic Church teaches that if you are infused with grace, the sanctifying grace, and you bombard it with actual graces, God will do the battle for you, except in very extraordinary situations. That is why we begin Mass and end Mass without talking about binding and casting. Because the graceful period, the grace that is imbued in the Mass itself, in the activities of the Mass, the grace that is imbued is able to give us a certain security. A security of maybe the sanctifying grace. The sanctifying grace, he talked about maybe if you are receiving Holy Communion, you ensure that you receive the Holy Communion as if it is your last communion, and you've done it right. The grace is renewed. There are a number of ways whereby you gain actual graces within the context of the Mass, and even outside the context of the Mass. Each time you undertake a corporal work of mercy, each time you undertake a spiritual work of mercy, these things are specified and defined. Each time you do them, you are increasing the totality of grace within your life. And that totality of grace within your life protects you from what you may call harmful radiation. You know, on Earth, the radiation that are coming from the sun, some of them are so harmful, but because we are within the atmosphere reflects a number of them back, and we are protected, and we stay. People in space, people that live the Earth atmosphere, they have to protect themselves against very dangerous radiations. So, my dear friends, the Eucharist is a protector. Let us not play with it. It is the source and summit of our worship. If we take it as seriously as we should, this grace will be so abundantly available to us. that you'll be surprised. You can also be annoyed, because it can be annoying that you have already plotted how to commit evil and enjoy the process of the evil, and then grace comes and destroys the thing. It can be annoying, but it is salvific. So we cannot, because we want to enjoy a little good, be angry with God because Opaya stored somewhere the whole thing Ayasa. Ayasa you never only need to realize you can as of Takwagana this on one car. That is the grace in action. So my dear friends, we continue to pray for ourselves, struggling to remain in state of grace, knowing that if we are not in state of grace, these actual graces will not work. Because the actual graces, they require the condition for them to work is an activated sanctifying grace.